All right. Good evening, everybody. My name's Adam White, and it is time for the October 2023 Government and Legislative Affairs update. And I get everything set up on these cameras, and then when you go live, the camera view changes. That happens to me every time. Anyway, it is good to be giving you this update from the NENANA headquarters for the Alaska Airmen's Association. Most of you know that I work remote and do government legislative affairs. Our main office is in the Anchorage area, actually right there on Lake Hood. So if you ever make it down that way, stop in and say hello. So a couple things I want to update us on this time around. We are in the middle of a continuing resolution and stopgap funding for the FAA, and stopgap funding has been in place for the federal government for a few weeks now, and is scheduled to expire on November 17th, 15th, 17th, somewhere around that time frame. And so things in Congress a little preoccupied with what's going on in the Middle East right now, but hopefully there will be a budget passed and funding can be reinstated for the FAA. Now, I know a lot of folks are thinking, well, you know, what happens if the FAA goes away? Actually, a lot can happen. The FAA will pull back to essential life safety type activities. And what does that mean for us as aviators here in Alaska? Well, it will mean that all the training that happens for FAA personnel will cease. And you think, well, that's not that big of a deal. Actually, it is. The last time we did this kind of thing where the FAA had to shut down the air traffic control school that the FAA has in Oklahoma City, it took almost a year for that to get back up and running with a steady supply of new controllers. ATC is woefully understaffed right now. I was in a meeting last week, a presentation from the Fairbanks Tower, and they're short, and they're going to be even shorter here before the end of the winter, with folks transferring and retiring and all those kinds of things, which is normal attrition. But when you don't have anybody to replace them, it can get kind of interesting. And Fairbanks is not the only place that has that issue. Anchorage as well is dealing with staffing issues along those lines. So other things that are happening within the FAA could cease until funding is reestablished, and the FAA has a reauthorization bill that has been signed. Again, they are continuing to operate until the end of this year to get that reauthorization passed. But the funding, is like all the other federal government funding, is only available until the 17th of November unless the Congress gets a budget passed. So, yeah, we need to see if we can't get that hammered out in D.C. Something that I've been involved with all day long today, literally from 8 o'clock till about 3:30. We got out a little bit early. We were supposed to go till 4:30. So the Anchorage airspace redesign. You've heard me talk about that before. It's been mentioned off and on. A lot of folks are saying, hey, Adam, what's going on with that? What's the update? When can we comment? What's happening? It's a very slow and long and arduous process. And it all came to be because the military, the Air Force specifically, wanted to add a ILS approach to runway 16 at JBear there at Allison, Joint Base Richardson, at Elmendorf, not Allison. Allison's that way from where I'm sitting right now, over past Fairbanks and North Pole. This is all happening down in Anchorage at Elmendorf. In order to get that ILS, missed approach procedures are going to be a problem because it comes into the CAR-T airspace outside of Merrill Field. Now, a lot of folks that aren't familiar with Alaska, you're thinking, man, Adam, what are you talking about? Well, the Anchorage Bowl is a very complicated airspace. So complicated, in fact, that we have our own part of 93, FAR Part 93, that talks about the procedures to come in and out of the Anchorage Bowl. The meetings I'm involved with all day today, all day tomorrow, and all day on Thursday are designing new instrument procedures for the Anchorage Bowl to accommodate the request for an ILS there at JBear on runway 16, which will eventually be 17. with a MAG-VAR change, the magnetic variation update, which will happen here in a couple years. So this is the first step, doing instrument arrivals and departures, SIDS and STARS, standard instrument departures, standard instrument arrivals, terminal arrival procedures. So that's what the process is right now. There is a goal to get that, and I'll just come over here and check my notes to make sure I get these right, because if I didn't take notes, I wouldn't remember all these dates and times and everything. So the goal is to have the implementation for these new IFR procedures coming in out of Anchorage International to be in place by basically October 29th of 2026. So that kind of gives you an idea how long of a process this is going to be. Now, that's not the only thing that has to be changed. The Class C airspace needs to be accommodated for these procedures and all these things that are happening. And there's going to be a discussion, is it going to remain Class Charlie? It's not going to go down to Class Delta, we know that, right? But with the numbers of the air traffic, with the expansion of the operations there at J-Bear, Bryant Army Airfield, Merrill Field, Lake Hood, all these things, believe it or not, Anchorage more than exceeds the threshold for a potential Class Bravo airspace. Now, I'll tell you, that's going to be a heavy lift for the FAA to do. That's going to be there's going to be a lot of conversation if they propose that, because we've got the Mode C veil, which would include everything out in the Mat-Su Valley, 30 nautical miles from the primary airport, which would be Anchorage International, which also brings with it an ADS-B requirement. So Class Bravo airspace is going to be a heavy lift for Anchorage. But I will tell you, it has to be talked about at that level. Now, I don't think it's going to go so far that there'll be a public comment period on that for a very long time, if ever. It'll be 2027 before the Part 93 procedures are modified and dealt with when it comes to looking at that Class Charlie airspace and the Class Delta airspaces between Anchorage, Merrill, Lake Hood, J-Bear, all of that. So all this stuff is being looked at. It needed to be done, regardless of what the proposal was in the request from the military, but that's what started it. And so be looking for more updates and more information about that as they become available. But what you need to know and understand at this point is that it is a very long and methodical, arduous process, and because we want to make sure we do it right. We don't want to leave anything forgotten or not addressed, and new procedures take time to implement and to design, all those things. So that's what's happening at that level. 100 low lead. I anticipate the EPA coming out with their endangerment finding any moment. So get ready for that. So let me just. Excuse me, hopefully that was actually muted when I turned off the microphone. I'm fighting a head cold right now. You can probably hear that in my voice. And the more that I talk, the more my throat gets that little tickle in it. So EPA, 100 low lead. Anticipate that endangerment finding that we know is coming to be released in the near future. And I say near future, probably before the end of the calendar year. And we know what it's going to say. Lead is bad. Leaded fuel is bad. FAA, you need to figure out a way to get lead out of aviation fuel. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. We've kind of been told that that's what's coming. There's some potential replacement fuels out there that are being tested right now. A couple of them actually have some approval processes underway, and STC process. There's some other processes in the works for a couple of other viable alternatives. At least they appear to be viable at this point. But there's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of uncertainties. And so the Alaska Airmen's Association is wanting to do more engagement, kind of like what I do here on my social media updates, with a podcast series. So you can expect the first podcast for the Alaska Airmen's Association to be about 100 low lead and a deep dive that I'm going to do with a couple of guests that you'll be interested to hear what they have to say. about 100 low lead and things that we really need to consider, especially here in Alaska, that you don't hear much about in the media, in the aviation media especially. We hear a lot about, will my engine run on 100 low lead replacement fuel? Well, that's not the only questions we ought to be asking. So expect more details. You'll get an email if you're an Alaska Airmen's Association member. You'll see it talked about on our social media outlets about when that podcast will be released. I'm going to be interviewing, like I said, a couple of guests about this issue and about a couple of things that we don't hear much about in this process. So again, that'll be coming up here in the coming weeks. ADSB. I talked a little bit about ADSB in the Anchorage Bowl. Some exciting things are happening with ADSB here in Alaska. We are getting more ground stations. FAA is working very hard to get those things up and running. Anticipate seeing some of those next summer come online. The FAA is reevaluating one or two locations right now to get the best location and access to infrastructure for some of that. So what you'll see is an increase in coverage for the Flight Information Services broadcast. That's the METARs, that's the TAFs, that's the weather radar, all those NOTAMs and all those kinds of things that you get through ADSB-N. There'll be more ground stations here in the state that will be providing that information. Now, some of the broad general areas where we can expect an increase in coverage is going to be on the Kenai Peninsula and the Kodiak Island area, the Yukon Flats, the Copper River Basin, the Middle Yukon River. So those are some of the large geographical areas we can anticipate an increase in coverage here initially. And so look for those things to come online next summer. Some of them may be actually delayed until the following summer, just depending on work schedules and the weather. We'll see what the weather does for us next summer with that construction season. ADSB in Canada. I've mentioned this before, but the Canadian mandate came out for Class Alpha and Bravo airspaces, and they're having a little bit of a trouble. Not going to lie. They're having some trouble with that implementation. There's some disparity and some, I wouldn't go as far as to say disagreements, but there's some confusion, that's probably the best word, between how can you be in compliance with both NAV Canada and with Transport Canada when it comes to ADSB out equipage in Canada. Canada requires a diversity solution, meaning an antenna on the top or an antenna on the bottom, or actually the way the rule is written, an antenna that provides a signal both up and down. So what we're finding, though, is when people go off and do their performance evaluation, they may pass. But then later that afternoon, they make a flight, and they didn't pass. So there's things that are happening that are causing some questions about coverage, some questions about frequency congestion. And since all that information is going up to a satellite, there's some concerns whether or not this is actually working. And the Canadian government's already said that they're going to have to put in some ground stations to alleviate that frequency congestion, and that's going to be a possible solution. Now, what does this mean for us here in Alaska that don't fly in Class Alpha, Class A airspace, above flight level 180? Or when we go back and forth to the lower 48, we avoid Class Bravo airspace in Canada. Well, it's not going to stop there. The ADSB mandate is a rolled and phased ADSB mandate in Canada, and so we can expect that in 2025, I think is the next goalpost, there'll be an expansion in the requirements for ADSB equipage in Canada. And it will affect a lot of us that do fly occasionally through Canada back to the lower 48. So I'm watching that close. I'm part of a working group that meets every month to talk about this with the Canadian Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, AOPA, some of the large manufacturers like Cirrus, Embraer, those guys. We're all on a call once a month talking about this issue and making sure we're tracking what's happening. So I talked a little bit about Mosaic last month, and EAA did a meeting last month, the EAA chapter there in Anchorage that I participated in. Some of you may have dialed in for that virtually via Zoom, or that maybe they're in the room in Anchorage. Had some technical difficulties, but we overcame that and continued on talking about those things. And Mosaic, modernization of special airworthiness certification. Acronyms. I actually had to check my notes to make sure I remembered what Mosaic stood for. I mentioned a comment period that was supposed to end this month, but the comment period has been extended till January 22nd. And so there's various reasons why it was extended. Gives us more time to comment, essentially. And so the basics of Mosaic, what it's going to do is change and update the light sport pilot requirements and, the sport pilot requirements and the light sport aircraft certification. I got this flipped around, sorry. So encourage you to go online and look. If you are a member of the Airmen's Association, there was an article in this transponder where I gave a link where you can go find out some more information in the Federal Register. That link, however, goes to the original posting on the FAA website for the proposed rulemaking. That has since been updated. There's a new page that has the new comment period deadline, but it'll give you an idea of what they're talking about changing. Basically, increasing the stall speed for the light sport aircraft, which would do away with some speed requirements. It'd be raised up to 250 knots, and gross weight could go up to 3,000 pounds. So, pretty big expansion there. So, encourage you to go look and see what that is about and whether or not you would like to comment. If you see anything in there that you think needs to be addressed, I encourage you to write a comment, but when you do make your comments, copy me on them if you don't mind as well. That way I know what your concerns are. I can make sure that we're integrating that into our comments to the FAA and make sure that that I'm educated on what all of you are interested in doing there. One last item for us this time around, speaking of flying through Canada, border crossings and Customs and Border Protection. Those of you who have flown through Canada and come back into Alaska through Northway know that we've had some scheduling issues where there were only 2 times a day that Customs was available in Northway. That's a little problematic because weather doesn't always cooperate, and when you have an appointment and you don't make it when it comes to Customs, they have the ability to actually put a pretty big dent in your wallet with some fines. And however, most of the Customs folks are very understanding when it comes to why you may have been late if it was due to weather. But they also have budget constraints, and that's where a lot of these things are coming from. And so myself and a few other folks in the industry are working with Customs and Border Protection, kind of starting a conversation about maybe what can we do different? How could this look to be a little bit easier for us trying to come and go? And the limitations of small GA aircraft, where it's just, it's not feasible to go from Whitehorse to Fairbanks nonstop or Whitehorse to Anchorage nonstop. Now, it is for some aircraft, not for Super Cubs or some of the smaller single-engine pistons. So that's what we're working on there. If you have any ideas, if you have any suggestions, I would love to hear from you. Love to know what your ideas are about when Customs and Border Protection availability might look like. Now, 24/7 would be awesome, but that's asking too much in the current budget climate and personnel requirements they just can't meet that. They can't meet that 24/7 ideal. So we'll have to do some give and take. I think that we can do better than just 2 times a day. I still want it to be 7 days a week, though. I don't want to sacrifice having certain days where they're just not available at all to gain more time. So, again, if you've got some ideas, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me through social media like you're doing, like you're watching here right now. You can also go to the alaskaairman.org and look, and my contact information is there. So that being said, you probably should go look at the Alaska Airman's website, because we are now selling tickets for this year's raffle airplane. And Dancini Air and Palmer is building the aircraft for us this year, and some pretty cool stuff happening there. A lot of great prizes, and a great airplane that is in the process of being built as we speak. So I'm going to wrap things up. We're hit that 20-minute mark, and it happens fast, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why the podcast is going to be started, where, again, I'm going to do a deep dive, more than 20 minutes, talking about the 100 low lead issue and impacts we could potentially face here in Alaska with a change in fuel. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and say good night. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for watching. Appreciate those interactions and emails that come out of these things, and glad to give you an update. If you have anything specific you'd like to talk about that I haven't spoke about, please let me know. I'd be glad to give you an update on those things, either personally, directly there via email, or I'll add it to the update list for the next time. So we'll talk to you next time. Good night.